know that a large number of organizations spend time in surveying their employees about job satisfaction. They're looking for employees that are disengaged, trying to find out what would motivate them to be engaged. Um, uh, these are all attitude surveys. They can be used as data. Sometimes, though, the data is not accurate. Again, the question of how the data is reported, who's doing the reporting. You have to be very careful about absorbing, so to speak, as fact the survey results from attitude surveys. But they are important because what they do indirectly is show that the organization is committed to listening, to hearing. Now, but in any of the human psychology, we know that if I'm listening to you, often it implies that I might then do something. In other words, my listening has some fruits to it. In other words, you might see that the employees, when questioned about their attitude, really do expect that the employer would make changes based upon their responses. So it has its own double-edged sword approach. Those attitudinal surveys, just be careful of using them. Make sure that they will move you forward and not just simply waste the time of those responding. The book goes into some aspects of individuals at work, individual performance, motivation that I'll leave to your reading. I want to move on into then absenteeism and the problems that we face with costs of not only just absenteeism, but also high turnover. I'm not sure of any one person's experiences in the area of discipline. When there is a large amount of absenteeism, it could be late, not showing up, it could be anything, or leaving the job early. The concept from an employer's perspective is that an employee who shows up late but still is paid, or leaves work early and is still paid, is really a concept in theft. That's the view, that the employee is stealing from the company because that individual is taking the money but not contributing back. And that is actually in HR's, it's an old view that HR has had for a long time, which is that absenteeism is a form of theft. You don't see it too much in the academic books, but you'll probably run into it if you work in the field. There's different methods to respond to tardiness or absenteeism or whatever, and we're going to talk about discipline in another chapter, so we can save that later. So you can use your policies on discipline at that point, warnings, first, second, whatever. You can also think about ways you can improve the performance through positive reinforcement, ways of getting training back into that worker's schedule, ways of talking about bonuses even for certain types of early show or extra work. There's all sorts of ways that you can say, how can we help improve you? There is a problem, though, with this approach, which is, it's not in the book, is that absenteeism is one of those areas of human behavior that is not necessarily trainable. There's a lot of people in HR and human resource development that do believe that absenteeism is as something that cannot be fixed in terms of a training event, or in other words, it's asking someone to appreciate the other person more. And if people don't have that coming into the workforce, if they lack respect of others' time and whatever, that's something that that no training in the world can actually fix. As they say, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And so the idea is that there's some approaches, I think, that work as positive reinforcement opportunities that were not realized now that can come to that worker. Perhaps there's a reason why there's absenteeism. Is it because of daycare issues or lack of transportation? So there are very positive ways to look at absenteeism to fix it, but there are some situations where it is intrinsic in an individual's behavior that they just simply don't respect the other person, which in this case is the company and the company's pay. There are some companies that actually look the other way. They are mostly in sort of that Silicon Valley mindset, of high-tech industries where you can show up, you can not show up, it doesn't matter. They're going to keep you and you're going to keep performing at different times. Different industry. So again, look at this issue, but look at it as well as a cost to HR, cost to the company when we combine absenteeism with turnover problems, which is the next discussion. Because really the costs that are associated with absenteeism are very similar, if not the same, as the turnover costs. I'll turn to page 64 in your book, and you can see, I think, a very nice figure. I do like this book's approaches to visual information. So there are direct costs and indirect costs in these two sort of Venn diagram circles. Obviously, if an individual is not working, not showing up, there will be late deliveries. There could be other people that have to come in and work overtime to cover that shift. It might be that the line is now slower because of the one person who could only, who does the spraying or does paint, is not there, so everything has to slow down. It could be that because the person's not responding because of the tardiness, there is lack of customer response. Consumer lines are not being answered. Supervisors also have to be pulled off their work and back into the line often when an individual worker doesn't show up. And it goes on. And think about those types of costs with people then who leave. If there is then a person that quits, or you have some form of last disciplinary stage and you fire the individual, the idea is what? The same things happen. Deliveries are late, work is slow, production doesn't go. There are many times you have to bring in overtime shifts to accommodate that lack of the lack of that worker on that line. And again, supervisors are very upset because now they have to retrain and they lose their time in proper supervision in producing quality products or whatever. So the definition here of direct and indirect costs of absenteeism, I think, applies to the problems of turnover. One of the concerns that companies have is their turnover rate. And there is, on the bottom of page 66, a method of measuring turnover rate. I think most companies are very concerned about this because it is high turnover rate may indicate a lot of variables, and you need to nail those down. It could be the lack of motivation, there could be global competition, there could be local competition for the job forces, it could be that compensation packages aren't sufficient. There's all sorts of reasons, and one of the concerns that HR has is just simply measuring that turnover rate. And because if you have a high turnover rate, you can pretty much guess that you're going to have also a high indirect cost and high direct costs for your losses, for losing those employees. Last discussion is actually one of the most important, and we only get about a page and a half in our book, which is management retention. What about keeping our managers and making sure that their jobs are working, that they enjoy them, that there's personal motivation to continue as a manager? Actually, there goes into a deeper issue with that in terms of recruiting and selecting managers. One of the things that we've seen in the last 20 years is the lack of proper candidates for management positions. People are being promoted without management training. There's all sorts of faults and failures with our use of managers. There's discussion. I was involved in human resource development with management retention, and we had many people want to use the management model of coaching. Mentoring is another phrase. Coaching is a little different. Mentoring requires a lot more time, and coaching merely allows an individual to respond like a big brother to a low-level manager, and occasionally give a coach's speech. The problem with all that is that it lacks formality, it lacks structure, and even though we had on paper from an HR perspective that certain middle managers were part of the mentoring program or coaching program, nothing really came of it because the higher managers really didn't care for that. One of the reasons I found that the higher level managers didn't want it is because they felt they were going to be replaced. That there was a recidivist, an anti-recidivist kind of approach. The higher level managers, the managers, the executive managers did not like the deputy managers getting into their affairs because they knew that they were just waiting for them to move on. So the book doesn't really give us a great deal here, but management is a key problem, and I will mention that if you are in HR, you really do want to pay attention to different types of programs and structures to give your managers support and not just simply assume that they are doing the job and liking it. There's a great deal of information out there that may not even be available to your managers. You want to get that to them, help them, and encourage them as you would any worker.